This conference will now be recorded.
Good morning, everybody.
Morning.
Morning. Okay, very good. The live stream is started. You're welcome to go ahead and start the meeting.
Thanks, Tessie. It's Wednesday, July 8th, and the Sexual Misconduct Committee meeting will come to order with the following members present. Mr. Giacalone.
Here.
Mr. Ganadakis.
Here.
Ms. Montgomery.
Here.
And myself, Michael Schottenstein. Could I please get a motion for approval of the June 10th, 2020 Sexual Misconduct Committee meeting minutes?
So moved.
Mr. Giacalone. And
Yeah, second.
And okay, and so all in favor, aye?
Aye.
Thank you. So I think we're going to start off, Stephanie, with a review of the working group presentation. Is that right?
Sure. And I'm not going to go through the whole presentation. We just wanted to make sure that you had that in your board materials. We did present to the governor's working group on June 16th and gave them a status update of everything that we've accomplished to date. And so first, I would say thanks to Tessie and Stuart for putting this presentation together. We received a lot of positive feedback from the working group about the format of the presentation, as well as the content of the presentation. Putting it all together and saying it all, it's really pretty amazing everything we've accomplished in the last 6 months. And we've done a lot of work with those working group recommendations, and we've done a lot of collaborative work as staff. And so I think talking through that, it was helpful for all of us to see kind of how far we've come in 6 months, and frankly, how close we are to the finish line on a lot of the working group recommendations. I think the thing that I would point out that you can't really see in the slides that I stressed to the working group was that a lot of this is culture work, and culture work is never really done. So, those aren't things that we really check off on a checkbox and say, oh, look, we're great. We all get along. We all talk. We all communicate. All of you have been parts of organizations, and you all know that that work is never done. And so we will keep plowing through that and keep trying to get better every day in the way we work together. And we'll have bumps in the road, and we'll have other things that sort of present challenges to us. But I think bringing up staff morale, having people become more familiar with what other people are doing for their jobs. So that understanding of jobs amongst the different groups, and really kind of understanding where we as a board are headed will help us move forward with whatever we're facing, whether it's the Strauss working group, whether it's another big challenge that presents us. So moving forward in the same direction, I think, will be critical. So really, and if you have questions about the working group, it took about an hour to go through the presentation, so I don't want to spend the whole thing here. And really, it is just a culmination of all of these meetings. So the working group presentation doesn't tell you anything that we haven't already talked about in all of these committees. After every committee that we have each month, we send a letter to Director Stickrath telling him basically what the committee talked about and what we accomplished the month before. So just sort of a big accumulation of everything that we've been working on to date. Any questions about what we presented? Yep. Mr. Ganadakis?
Thank you. Great report. What type of feedback did you get from some of the members, like anything from County Prosecutor Ron O'Brien or any other law enforcement members of the committee?
So we did not get anything from Mr. O'Brien directly. We did hear from the law enforcement folks that they want to hear a little more specificity in what we're doing with respect to law enforcement. So we were pretty much right in the middle of starting all of those initiatives with building our law enforcement contacts when we went out for the pandemic. So we had done some outreach, we had met with some associations, but our next step was really going to be going out to those local offices and making connections with faces to names. we have a lot of new investigators in our Western region. We have some new investigators in our Eastern region. So sort of reestablishing those relationships. And there's really no better way to do that than to just pop in and hand a business card and say, hey, if you have questions, give me a call. I'm here for you. I'll be calling upon you when I need to. We have done the new protocol, so that will be the process. Now it's just putting the faces with the names. That work started back up again very, very locally where it's kind of safe to do. So I think they're looking for more specificity once we get going with that, just to know exactly how we're working with that. So that's an ongoing. And again, as we onboard new staff, we're just going to have to make a concerted effort to make that part of our onboarding plan for new employees, that they work on those relationships right from the outset in their territories and their regions.
I can tell you, Michael, I spoke with Karen Huey a day or so afterwards. Karen Huey is the deputy director over at public safety. And so she was in the meeting, and she used to be my deputy chief of staff, and she has had a lot of different roles over at BCI, and they could not be more complimentary of what they've seen in the presentation. They were very impressed with the way Stephanie presented the case in the completeness of the process. And I have to tell you, Stuart and your staff and Tessie, the visual presentation was very impressive to them. And frankly, I think it's very impressive, even though I can't read all the charts very well. I thought that was just a beautifully done, that you did a beautiful job. They thought you did a beautiful job. They were very impressed how much has gotten done. Congratulations to Stuart and Tess for wonderful work there.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, it was a great presentation that I, had the privilege of being able to listen to firsthand as it was ongoing, and it was very thorough and very well received. And I think that we're making progress in terms of finishing up our action plan items that are still outstanding. Stuart has estimated we're 82% complete with the working group action plan recommendations in terms of going through those, and about 74% of the way through our historical case review. So, we continue to make progress, which I'm grateful for. So thanks so much to staff.
I was at the meeting too. Well, let me say I was on a call on the meeting because they couldn't get in, and both Michael and I had trouble. Unlike the way Tessie and Stuart are handling this, that meeting was not very technologically easy to deal with, but they were very impressed.
Great. Thank you so much. Any other comments or questions for Stephanie? Okay.
I would just say, just real quick in conclusion, I just want to keep reiterating that it's a presentation, right? And so much of this is what we continue to do on a daily basis. And so it's nice to be able to say we're complete with some tasks, but so much of this is just not task work. It's just constant improvement, right? And so that's something I want to reassure the committee that we are not taking our eye off the ball when it comes to continuing to get better and just keep pushing this forward.
Thank you so much. So really substantially, the majority of what we do have left, though, for our tasks has to do with the legislative proposals and the recommendations from the FSMB audit. So those legislative proposals are substantially divided into proposals that are not related to the F5 statute and proposals that are related to the F5 statute. And so today, what we're going to talk about are the proposals that we've already seen before, the ones that are not related to the F5 statute. And we'll, continue this process and bring the F5 related proposals to you, in the near future. But today, maybe we can just go through some of the legislative proposals that are not related to F5. So Stephanie, you have a memo for us in that regard?
Sure. So laying the groundwork, these are just drafts. These are our working drafts that we've been kind of pushing through with staff. We have consulted with a couple of external folks who know the world of prosecution, and so they, not speaking for their individual offices or for their associations or anything like that, just folks who we can tap into their legal minds to kind of help to make sure that we're starting on the right track. We brought these drafts to you at our March meeting. And took that feedback that you all provided to us at the March meeting, did some more research, talked with another state on one of the issues. We've looked at some of the North Carolina laws a little more closely, again, consulted with those external reviewers, and now we're coming back to you with this next set of drafts. Our goal is to get you all comfortable with the draft as they are, and then we will take these to the larger associations, to our stakeholders. Just to reiterate, legislation is a really slow process when we're drafting this way, right? And so it just takes a while. It has to be really methodical. And something that we probably need to just clarify for everyone is that we can have all of these great ideas. We still have to find a bill sponsor for some of this stuff, right? And so that will be part of our legislative strategy as we go forward once we get comfortable with our drafts. And then we also work with LSC, and LSC does the actual drafting, right? So I just want to make sure that everyone's on the same page there, that we're very, as far as legislation goes, we're really early in the process, getting the board comfortable with where we are with things. So I think that yes, Mr. Gamadakis.
Thank you, Stephanie. Sorry to interrupt. Since the governor's mandate to the state medical board to begin this process a while back now, I can't recall the specific date and time, probably a year ago. Has there been a member of the legislature, either in the House or Senate or both, that has been engaged in this issue, or that has had particular interest in this issue over the past year or so, that might lead us to want to work with them if they have been at any level of involvement?
We haven't identified an exact representative or senator yet to talk with. We have had some conversations with the governor's office staff just around general strategy and understanding of if there are other administration priorities. Would we couple that with this, or would we go it alone? And then just sort of, again, I hate to keep coming back to this because I sound like a broken record, but the in-person visits with our reps and senators really slowed down so much when we left in March. And so we haven't had any direct dialogue with that. It's, something that when it comes to what we estimated timing to be on actually being able to accomplish this and move this forward, we knew that it was going to be a longer process. We knew that we were probably looking at end of this calendar year, maybe even beginning of next. So really, when we looked at kind of the priorities of getting the working group work done, we sort of held this as our last big initiative that we need to push through. And we want to make sure we have the board comfortable with the language before we really go talk to anyone. We don't want to get ahead of, I think, this committee when we go to a member. We want to be able to explain to a member, we have our committee really comfortable with where we are with this, and then take that input and feedback from the member. So that will be something I would envision us doing after we have this meeting, having those conversations with the stakeholders, that we can start that work in August and September, really sort of having the in-person kind of identifying who's the right pick for getting this done. And of course, any thoughts on that any members have would be appreciated. So if anybody has ideas as to who would be helpful, we are all ears. Okay, so walking through, and Kim, please feel free to jump in as I'm kind of talking through these as our drafter here on this work. So instead of going through each section kind of line by line and looking at the language, I think the best approach is for us to really pick up where we left the discussion with the board. I know that's a little difficult because that was back in March. But the way the memo is drafted, we should be able to, I think, move through the pieces that way. The language in each section that changed from March to now is actually in bold in your statutory sections. So when Kim drafted the first round in March, they were underlined. You'll see that new language that has been added since March is now bolded in your different drafts. So the first section that we a group of sections that we come to are the criminal statutes in Chapter 2907, and it's important to point out that these aren't our code sections. These code sections belong to folks who live in the criminal statutes world, right? So 4731 is the medical board statute. It's always a little dicey when you're playing in other people's statutes. So I think we have to be very mindful of our drafting when we do that, and also, thinking about bill sponsorship. That again, we're really mindful of what we are amending in someone else's statutes. So when we looked at this original set of criminal statutes, one of the suggestions that we had was to add the podiatric medicine. And when we had a couple of our friends review it externally, they also recommended that we add in our massage therapists. And so I would assume that the committee would feel comfortable with adding in massage therapists to all of these sections as well. But pretty safe bet.
Yes.
Okay.
What about respiratory therapists then, since we also regulate them?
I think
So the thought crossed my mind also, Stephanie, which is why not all of our licensees for that matter? In other words, why add in piecemeal certain licensee groups and not just make it across the board for all of our licensees?
Yeah, I think, that's a fair question. I think some of our licensees are more prone to being in a situation where they would actually have a physical touch with a patient. Mm-hmm. And so let's think that through. Maybe the only ones who wouldn't would be dietitians, but then let's kind of look and see. So we'll make a note of that to follow back on all of our licensees. I think it makes good common sense. We also had a discussion with respect to 290701 regarding the language without privilege to do so. And I think we had quite a bit of discussion about that, about clarifying what that means and that it was for a legitimate medical purpose. So, as we were trying to look at other sections and as we were reviewing and doing some research on this, I think the real concern here is changing a definition that would apply to everyone in 2907. I think we understand the intent of the board, and that would make our lives, I think, cleaner and crisper on this section. This is one, though, it really wasn't raised as a concern by anybody who we had looked at this, but I don't think we would want to even propose that clarification of a change without having gone to some of those bigger associations like our Prosecutors Association and talking with folks who live in these sections day in and day out. So I think we need to get more feedback from the wider world on that section before we can come up with something that would work for us. Eddie, I think you're talking, but we can't hear you.
I think we have to be really careful about fooling around with these cases, because these statutes, because there's case law attached to it, and unintentionally. That's why it's so important to talk to me. In one of the very first bill I ever passed, it was in this section, in the definition of what was considered rape, and the insertion of a finger had been statutory, had case law been removed, so we had to put it back in statutorily, and so the case law really. This is really, the prosecutors really have to weigh in on this one. It sounds good on paper until you realize there are consequences in courts.
Moving on to number 3 on our list. Again, same type of concept with this. But when we were talking through the language here, the suggestion from the board was to make this while the offender is providing medical care. Again, after doing some research and looking at what other states have done, our proposed language on that would be to include the the phrase "in the course of medical treatment." And so if you're looking at that definition in 2907-03A11 or 06A6, we've included that phrase that the sexual conduct occurs in the course of medical treatment. Again, I think to Ms. Montgomery's concerns, same concerns there, making sure that we're staying above board with current law and intent of what the folks who do this every day are living in. Now I'm moving on to number 4 on page 2 on the statute sections. And so this is one we talked about with respect to the statute of limitations. And Kim, you can maybe jump in here and describe this a little bit better than I can. But the feedback that we heard was to recommend changing that sexual battery limitation to 25 years after the age of 18. And we think, doing some more research, we think that subsection J might actually address some of the board's concern. And so that language, we did not draft 2901 for you. That just sort of came up in our discussion when we first, that was in a working group recommendation. We were talking through these, and that recommendation was made on the statute of limitations. So we have the language from 290113J as a footnote in your memo that sort of walks through that. So I don't know if anybody has any feedback about, does that address the concern that was raised previously? I think, the real concern was, are we accounting for the fact that sometimes this memory might come to victims later or after they reach an age of majority? Any concerns or thoughts on that one? Okay. All right. So I'll move on to number 5, which again is statute of limitations. This is one that I think we really just need to talk to people who apply these statutes on a daily basis. 290113J. So we would be changing. This would have to be amended to differentiate the statute of limitations for sexual imposition from all other misdemeanors. And so this one, just kind of flagging it for the board, this is likely a can of worms of making a change this big, but it's fair to get feedback from prosecutors who are doing this work on a daily basis. Okay. All right. Number 6 on your memo on page 2. We talked about adding, let's look at 292122 F2, and the board proposed adding good faith language. So again, we looked at what other states are doing. In North Carolina, you have their language right there. And so the language that Kim drafted that we included was, so long as the individual is acting in good faith without fraud or malice. So I think we were able to address that concern to make sure we're sticking to a good faith standard, and had some good language to work off of from that one. Any concerns on that one? Okay. All right, I'm turning to page 3 on my memo, and number 7, where we have that 22F1 is limited to a violation against a patient, and that the board's sexual misconduct rules also include key third parties. And so our key third parties are parents of, either pediatric patients or other caregivers. And we also sort of learned that there's a possible loophole here that would provide immunity to a physician if a self-report was made. So we added language from your last draft so that we could address both of those concerns. So key third parties, and actually looking at it now, we'll probably have to define key third parties as it's defined in our administrative code. So we'll be adding then just kind of a definition section on key third parties there as well. Okay, our next big change.
I have a quick question about that, if I could.
Sure.
So we're talking about a patient or a caregiver or a parent of a patient. What if this sexual misconduct is with a staff member or something along those lines? Does that qualify into this, or is that a different?
I don't think that's not our issue.
Okay. Okay.
Right. Yeah.
It
Okay.
could still be a crime and addressed by another jurisdiction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, so next, peer review. The last committee meeting, we had a lot of discussion around the peer review statutes. So sections 230522 and 473122. And that we took your suggestions there to limit the language that was added to allegations of sexual misconduct and criminal misconduct. So I think that the drafting on that looks clean, and I think it's a good proposal. Again, we'll have some real discussions with all of our associations on this one, and we would expect some pushback from the associations on this. And but we'll have the conversation and keep pushing through per the working group's recommendations. Any questions on that?
Bethany, quick question. The pushback was what they wanted to eviscerate the whole peer review process?
So I think, just when we started going down the road of the legislation, actually right after I started some of the conversations that I had with the associations, one of their concerns was coming out of the working group report was the recommendation on opening up the peer review process. And I think, a fair concern on this is how professionals learn. These are processes that have been around for a really long time. There are reasons why they are protected. So I think there's concern on us striking that balance to make sure we're getting the information that we need, but that the learning process is still able to occur, and that we're not opening people up to unnecessary liability as well.
Okay, so it's the association. It's the association that you're worried about. Okay, I thought it was the law enforcement push. Okay, never mind. I understand.
Yep. Yes, exactly. Okay, reporting requirements. So looking at the bottom of page 3, we have 4731 to 24. And this one, we heard the board's concerns at the last committee and looked at the suggestion that ensuring that when people are reporting to us that there was a reasonable reason to suspect sexual misconduct after an investigation. And we played with the language, and we really went back to the working group's original recommendations. And we had, I think, a difficult time trying to come up with language that would kind of strike that balance between the two. So the working group, as we read it, really did envision us getting all of the information from the institutions and then us determining whether or not to go forward, right? So I think that putting any filters between that collection of information was really the concern that the working group had, that we are getting everything we need to go on, and then it's our jobs to fairly make that determination of what we need to do. So we left that language as drafted, obviously, open to further feedback on that. And when we did look at this with some of our professional friends, they did recommend that we put a time limit on this. So we did include the language that it would be within 30 days of the commencement of the investigation from the institution. So we have, or from the facility or hospital. So we did add that time limit in, but we did not, kind of find the right type of language to address, I think, the concern that was raised at the last committee meeting. Yes.
Last question.
Sure.
So, so this would be a statute change, but in terms of the medical board's participation in this, we don't have any enforcement capability over hospitals or organizations or such, right?
That's right.
So in that respect, how would this get enforced? In other words, if we heard about a hospital that, let's say, did not follow this, is there anything the medical board can do on its own?
In the past, we have looked at focusing on medical personnel that are decision makers. I don't know that we've ever brought a formal action in that way, but I know, in the investigative process, I think we have sent caution letters to medical directors about the duty to report for hospital privileges.
Kim, question just to follow up on Michael's. I mean, if we've never tried it, I mean, what do we feel the odds of success are on pushing that issue if we get somebody who's not going to cooperate?
I was having a little trouble hearing you. Can you repeat?
No, sorry. I said, given that we don't have any specific authority against the hospitals, I'm following up on Michael's question.
Mm-hmm.
You haven't tried attaching medical directors or whatever at the hospital, high-ranking officials that have decision-making. What do you think are the probabilities of success if we pursued that, is my question.
I think we are solid on having jurisdiction over individuals with medical licenses. So I think we are good there. I think the issue will come into the facts of the particular case, like how much were they involved in the decision making? Had they delegated that to someone else? Did they even know that it wasn't reported? It will become a factual situation, I think. And I don't know how, I don't know how that plays out. It probably depends on each individual case. And I think it's probably difficult to investigate that and get a clear idea of exactly what happened in, a large organization. I think that's tough.
Well, I guess my question is does it make sense to amend the statute to say specifically the individual who's the medical director or whatever, regardless of whether he knows, because he knows or doesn't know, that's a nice loophole, right? I never get the information. So we just insulate every other bureaucrat or attorney in between gets it. But if you have it so it reads the medical director who is in charge, regardless of whether he knows or doesn't know, is on the hook, will be disciplined for it. I'm just throwing it out there. I don't know first if that's doable, second if it's even passable.
I think that's a good point, and I think we can explore that. I think that may be an uphill battle just practically, but I think that's a good point, and that's always been one of the really tricky things with the statute is we don't have total enforcement authority. So, and that's also a really important source of information for us.
And right now, because we don't yet have the language that allows us to get information regarding criminal or sexual misconduct from the peer review process, the peer review process could end up acting as a shield from any discovery of this nature.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So I'm turning to page 4 of our memo. In our last section that we added new language, significantly new language, in 473122 is upon indictment proposing that we move towards summary suspension. And again, I think this is a big change for us. We're sort of in this constant battle when we have a licensee who's been indicted for a serious crime, and we work again with law enforcement and we do our best to get as much information as we can. But there are things that law enforcement may not be able to share with us, or that our work may actually interfere with their law enforcement process. And so then, we're kind of trying to balance all of that work, but we're also very mindful of that, of the fact that we have a licensee who has allegedly committed a serious crime, who might be able to continue practicing medicine, right? And so, while I love the medical board to be in win-win situations most of the time, frequently when we have a licensee who's been indicted, it feels like a lose-lose for the medical board. How do we make sure that we're going forward with the information that we need, but how do we also help law enforcement preserve their criminal case for the bigger picture. And so our staff actually, this is not a working group recommendation. This was a recommendation that came from our staff that we would be able to move forward on the summary suspension. And so last time that we talked about this, we talked about recommending language that would allow for doing this via telephone, and also to make it very clear that this is a full board decision, not a secretary and supervising member decision. So we amended that language. And then we had a lot of discussion on whether or not we should be making this a may or a shall for the secretary and supervising member. And we did update that language to a shall. So I'm open for further discussion on this before we really start shopping this publicly and making sure the committee feels comfortable with where we landed on this, because this is a big legislative change for us.
I support it. I don't see any downside. And if it doesn't get passed, well, then we can always say, we would have the opportunity to push forward on it, but legislature stopped it. So what's the downside for pushing this?
I think there is a downside. I think the downside is that indictments get dismissed. And so if we summary suspend somebody based solely on indictment, and that indictment gets dismissed, the question is, has that licensee received fair due process? And in that regard, does that then look like overreach on the part of the board? And could that then invite additional scrutiny, by legislators who say that the medical board is abusing its power?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
I have really mixed feelings about this, because I think that we put the medical board in a trick box, and particularly our supervising members, or secretary and supervising members, because we may have a bad actor out there that we're not doing what we should be doing with. But I share Dr. Schottenstein's concerns, and I'm wondering if you go in legislatively asking for the ability to do a summary at the indictment stage, you may be able to work out some process that's less than a summary process, but protects the board and our citizens while we're working on it. So I don't know that it hurts to go in with asking for it and finding out what stakeholders are. But I do think we have to be very careful to take away someone's livelihood, and on a probable cause finding. There's not a guilty finding; it's just based on probable cause. So, I feel strongly about using our summary stuff, our summary suspensions more aggressively, but you don't want to put I just think we have to be very aware of the due process issues and the fairness issues.
I guess in that respect, I wondered if we, should have the ability to send a letter regarding notice of opportunity for hearing. In other words, if we could, cite based on indictment, but short of summary suspension. What I guess I was thinking is maybe that would help with some of the time delays that we have in our cases. In other words, if we could essentially have a parallel track, right, where we are getting the ball rolling on our end, but with the understanding, of course, that if at some point the indictment gets dismissed, then, all we've done essentially is looked into it. Yeah, Dr. Feibel.
Yeah, I think the problem with that is I think you're going to get the person indicted not willing to testify before the medical board. So I don't think that's going to work. And this can really be problematic, and I don't know how to deal with it, but let's assume somebody gets charged with 3 counts of rape. And the first we hear about is at the indictment. And we're not able to summary suspend because we don't have the information. And that person's now out on bond. and now practicing medicine. I'm not sure how that works, and I agree with the due process issues. It just is concerning to me that we would, from a public perspective, that we'd allow that person to continue to practice medicine.
So, if I may, Stephanie, could you speak to Rebecca and her team and her thought about this issue?
So when we've talked to staff about that, it builds on what Dr. Feibel was saying. The concern is that, we could cite, except that with an indictment, sometimes it's a secret indictment. So we don't have the information, and law enforcement may not be willing to disclose to us what they have, and rightfully so, right? They can't reveal their criminal case without being further in their process. And so we don't have the information, we don't have the right standard that we can even go to cite. So what this section does is it creates the statutory standard that the indictment equals the proof that we need to be able to go to summary suspension. And so I think they're stuck with this situation too, where they know this indictment is coming or has happened, but we just don't have the information that we need. And we try to run a parallel investigation to that and get as much as we can, but it really takes us sort of out of the middle too of trying to balance that law enforcement question where we could just go forward with the indictment.
One question I had, just from a practical standpoint, if we pushed for this, we get it, but we really don't use it. We use it more like a hammer in terms of on it before you execute on this and say, enter a consent agreement, because your alternative is to roll your dice and you may get a summary suspension, or you take the for sure consent agreement and you agree to hold your, doing anything in the interim. You get clear, boom, it's out. It's you really got nothing to worry about. What are you worried about? I mean, I'm using it more as a hammer than actually doing it. But I mean, we get in a box with somebody who looks pretty egregious. They're not willing to do anything. I think at least we have some recourse, because you're right. We don't win either way on this one. We either get tried in the press or we get tried somewhere else. But I feel like if we have the hammer, we don't have to execute on it. Number one. Number two, we can offer an alternative, which I think we should push to do more often than not. So just a suggestion. I don't know if that's even doable, but.
Yeah, I think, Bob, years ago point, when we do try to go for those B34s and we don't, it's a B34, is that right, Kim? It's a B34. Yeah. Right. We don't have the real leverage, right? So this would actually provide a piece of leverage when trying to negotiate that.
Exactly.
So if the legislature
does something like this, and I spoke with them, and I think it does operate in that way. Like they had one case where someone asked for a hearing, and then the information that they shared was shared with the criminal prosecutors, and it resulted in a conviction. And so just practically, most people don't request a hearing on it, and that's how it works for them. But that's also no guarantee, and you have to have all the mechanisms in place. But I do think that's been Kentucky's experience, and I think we can certainly talk with them and learn more about it. But in the conversation that I had with their attorney, that's how it's working out for them. They've had this for several years. They use it for inappropriate prescribing in pill mill cases a lot, and that's how it's worked for them.
Yeah, I think that's a tool we should have, quite honestly, and I think that's the way to use it. And then we won't get asked about doing these random summary suspensions. It's kind of like, if you look at the numbers, it's going to be 99% consent agreement. So what are you talking about? We're not using this.
I think that if the legislature will, grant us that language that the indictment itself constitutes independent proof of wrongdoing, then I think that, allows us to go forward with this in a judicious way.
So
I don't think.
the question, where do we end up on this?
Eddie, did you have something else there?
I think we have that language. It's sort of reminiscent of right now, if we order somebody to a 3-day chemical dependency assessment and they refuse to go, that constitutes independent proof of impairment, right? So to me, it would be a similar kind of situation if we could have a language of that nature, but with regard to criminal indictment, that constitutes.
Yeah, you'll recall that the Court of Appeals had just said that if we do that, the doc would have the right to ask for a hearing, and then you run into what Jonathan talked about, which is they have a hearing. They're probably going to take the fifth, and so I just think you go in and ask, and then we work through it. We try to work through it and use it as a tool, but I don't know if we're going to be able to get it all because of the due process question.
Mm-hmm.
I think those are all good points.
Yeah, it's great. Okay. Well, that takes us through all of that. That's really helpful feedback. So now we can move forward with our bigger stakeholder groups, and we'll be working on that and hopefully have a report out for you in the August committee meeting on where we land with some of our association feedback, and start talking with our legislature. That's it.
I missed. I've been having some technical problems here, so but and I won't want to delay everyone, but when we talked about peer review, duty report, and all that, I just have some language that I think needs to be massaged a little bit. I can talk to you offline on it if that's all right.
Sure.
So any other business before Sexual Misconduct Committee today?
We have Stuart, who is available to provide us a report out on the historical case review.
Oh, hi, Stuart. Thanks so much.
Hi there. Yeah, so similar to last month, just give that sort of same level of detail with updated numbers that were current as of yesterday afternoon. Dr. Schottenstein, as you had indicated, we were around 74%. As of yesterday, we've actually completed 75% of the historical case review. I know that's only 1% difference, but 75 feels really good to say. So there are under 300 cases remaining to be assigned out. So that's a great number to know. Of those completed reviews, 24% have recommended some sort of further action or evaluation, whether that be to reopen the case or contact law enforcement or duty to report, investigation, or some combination of those. And just keep in mind that number does sound kind of high, but that also includes all the cases that would be difficult to reopen. But we had asked our reviewers to kind of err on the side of caution and say, kind of regardless of what the timeline was on it, if this was from 1995 or from 2018, if you feel like we should do something on it, just tell us. And so that's just sort of the caveat to that percentage number. I just wanted to put that out there. Our weekly completion average is lower again this month than it was in May. And the 4-week average is now about 35 reviews per week. And this drop in output is due primarily to 2 factors. I think the AAGs that have been helping us have started being pulled back to other duties as cases have stopped being continued. And also we had a lot of people taking vacations around the July 4th holiday. And so we really saw a big drop right there in that week. We had kind of a fraction of our normal completion rate. Even with that drop, though, we're still completing about 3% of the total volume per week. And that pace still keeps us on track to complete the entire initial review stage by the end of the first quarter here in September. So no concerns there. And to date, we've been invoiced for a little over $112,000 by the contract reviewers. And the AGs have done 80 reviews for us now. And that has saved us on approximately 210 hours, so about $10,000. Can't stress enough how helpful that has been to have them involved in this. And finally, board staff have spent a little over 3,300 hours on just the historical case review itself. The entire working group project is about 4,400 hours. But so obviously most of it has been spent on this historical case review, as you would expect. And 1,800, so almost half of those 3,300 hours have been spent just after the contract reviewers have completed their initial review, and investigators, enforcement team. A lot of time spent as would be expected. So that's the balance of my update. And if you have any questions, I will try to answer them.
So for this, Dr. Bechtel, 24% to me is high. So, in a historical case review, 1 out of every 4, there was concerns expressed. As a task force, will you be able to break down in broad categories the reasons for further investigation, whether it was inadequate investigation, not reporting physicians who may have been violating duty to report? Will there be any broad classification of those that can help give the board guidance as far as how we do better? Or will that be part of the official report at the end?
Yeah, so I mean, I can certainly break down in a broad level. So I just gave you the 24% as the very highest level of detail, right? I don't have the numbers right in front of me to do this exactly right now, but I can give you the ones that are reopen the case versus law enforcement referral versus duty to report investigation. We can break it down like that in a very easy way. It would take I would have to look at the data and get back to you and see whether we could get some sort of an aggregate sort of post-mortem analysis of this percentage of cases were due to an insufficient investigation, or this percentage of cases were due to insufficient enforcement activity. I'll have to look at that and get back to you.
I think it would be really helpful for the board.
Yeah, I think so too. I think we might have a way that we can do it, Stuart. We can talk about that. So after the case is reviewed and it goes to our SWAT team for review, and then on to the secretary and supervising member, they do a summary sheet. And I think, yeah, it's still a lot, but we could quickly task someone with looking at those summary sheets and doing a breakdown of did we not have enough information in the initial investigation? Remember, we used to do age case reviews. So some cases got closed because they were old. And so we can break that down as to what the reviewer noted and what we then kind of learned from that. And I think that would be a good learning exercise for us too, as we're going into the future as we look at these cases.
I think Mark has a really good observation there, that if we're looking at 1 in 4 cases and we're saying this publicly, we better jolly well have some asterisks behind that percentage to allay the public's fear. I think Mark is right on there.
And having played in a lot of these cases myself, as I've worked with the SWAT team, as we've talked with secretary and supervising member, we did ask these reviewers to be hypercritical, right? Because these are external reviewers. They do not understand medical board process and practices as they first got started. We started, as Stuart mentioned, with the harder cases. And so I'd say that number is going to drop, but we did, as we're looking at some of these cases, we're seeing things that the reviewer might not have understood or noted. And so there are a fair percentage of these that even when they say reopen may be difficult, where we say, yeah, it's exactly difficult. They may have felt more comfortable saying reopen because common sense, or to the lay person, yeah, it looks like a reopen, but we actually know technically that we can't reopen it. So we'll see how that percentage shakes out too when we actually compare the recommendations for reopen versus where we land on the actual reopens.
Great. Any other sexual misconduct committee business today? Okay. Thanks everybody so much. A motion to adjourn then?
Move.
Mr. Ganadakis and Mr. Jackalone, thanks so much. All in favor? Aye?
Aye.
Great. Thanks, everybody. See you soon. At policy.